the concern rating of 1 through 10, 1 being not very concerned and 10 being very concerned. And it feels right to start with the defending champions, the Michigan Wolverines, who we saw week one. And look, they didn't necessarily look like world beaters, but they looked solid. And certainly the defense
Yeah.
did. You come back week two, you've got one of the best teams in the country coming to the big house. And Texas really proved that with a convincing win over Michigan, who's dropped now to number 17 in the rankings. Where's your concern meter for Sharon Moore's team?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's at least 5,
Mhm.
maybe even a little higher. And, the thing that we saw in week one that was a concern to me then was, during this turnaround at Michigan in 2021 and 2022, particularly, the strength of the team and the identity of the team was their offensive line, a dominant, bullying offensive line that by the time the fourth quarter came, they had worn you down and broken your will. Well, in 23, the year they win the national championship, it was still a great offensive line, but JJ McCarthy also did a lot throwing the football. So they didn't run for as many yards last year as they did the 2 years prior to that. Fast forward to this year, and we even saw it against Fresno State. They had trouble with Fresno State's front seven, the D line, the linebackers. They did not establish a dominant run game. So that was number one concern. Everybody focused on the quarterbacks, and that's still a problem because I don't think they have a great answer right now at quarterback. But the biggest issue to me for Michigan right now is their offensive line still has a ways to go. And the best way to help those two quarterbacks, Davis Warren and Alex Orji, is to have a dominant run game, and they don't have that right now. That doesn't mean they can't get it. And again, you mentioned Texas. Texas is legit. Texas
Sure.
is a legitimate, playoff contending team. They're going to contend for the SEC championship. They were in the playoffs last year. The strength of their team is their offensive line. And they showed that. I mean, they were the more physical, the better team from start to finish in that game. So you're talking about one of the elite teams. So I don't think Michigan has to wholesale make changes and go into strict panic mode, but there are areas of concern. And I think it starts with their offensive line.
Yeah, and let's not forget the talent level this team still possesses. This is game
Yeah,
2 of the
correct.
season. There's a new expanded playoff. We've talked a lot about it. If they can figure their stuff out early enough in the season, they can still make a push for that playoff, and you never know what happens once you get on the dance floor. The Donovan Edwards thing does feel a slight concern as well. You feel like you've got to get more out of him, and we talked about that during the game week one. It just feels like he's got to be a more of a factor for this
Yeah.
team if they want to reach their full potential. Move on to Oregon, because this is the team I feel like most people are probably most concerned about just based on the way
Right.
they won their first 2 games. They're 2-0, but neither game has given anybody solace as to, hey, this is a team that can legitimately compete for a title.
Yeah, and I think the opposite is true for Oregon. To me, the biggest area of concern is their defense,
Mm.
and particularly their run defense, and that really showed up in the win against Boise State. They could not stop the run. Now, that kid's a great running back,
Yeah, Ashton
probably the
Genty.
best. Yeah, he's probably the best in the country, but Oregon should be better at stopping the run. And if they want to win and really contend in the Big Ten, they're going to have to be able to stop the run better than they've shown so far in the first 2 weeks. I think Dylan Gabriel, they didn't score a lot of points in the offensively the first week. They scored plenty enough points to win comfortably in the second week, but Boise hung right with them. It took a last-second field goal to win because their defense gave up 34 points. So I think that the biggest concern for Oregon is their defense and their ability to stop people and stop the run, and that's where they have to make huge improvements before they get into the Big Ten schedule.
Where would you put in terms of their panic meter right now? Do you feel like it's got to be high, or is it still somewhere in the middle?
No, I think it's still in the middle and maybe even lower than Michigan's because, I think Dan Lanning will get their defense playing better. I think their offense is fine. They've got an experienced quarterback, which is different than Michigan. So, they're going to be able to score and move the ball and do all that. They just got to get their defense figured out.
Also got a couple of returns and got some points from their special teams, which certainly helps things against Boise State, who, by the way, Boise State's a good football team. That's the
Yeah,
team that's
they've owned
expected.
Oregon, right? They've
Yeah,
owned Oregon in the series. So I mean, it's a good win for Oregon, but it kind of causes concern around the country because everybody's thinking, well, they're going to challenge Ohio State in the Big Ten. They're going to be in the playoffs. And
Yep.
they still very well may be that, but they've got some work to do.
Yep, still in the top 10, so still right there in line. Last team that we'll look at for this first down here, Penn State, your alma mater. Week 1 offense really looked like they were pushing the ball down the field a little bit. Week 2, they had to sneak past Bowling Green 34-27. Where's your panic meter?
I'm not panicking, but I don't like the inconsistency of it. I mean, they look really solid. And that first game, they had the long weather delay. They had to come back out of the locker room. You're on the road doing that. And they took care of business. They controlled that game from start to finish. Bowling Green, I mean, hung around. If it wasn't for a couple late interceptions in the fourth quarter, that game could have really gotten away from them. But they never pulled away. You're thinking, okay, second half, they'll get after him in the locker room, say, hey, we can't mess around anymore. They'll take care of business the second half. They were never able to distance themselves from Bowling Green. And I don't want to take anything away from my dad's alma mater, Bowling Green. I mean, Scott Leffler's a really good coach. It's a good football team. But Penn State should not have had that much trouble with Bowling Green at home. Now, we're not going to find anything more about Penn State this week because they play Kent State at home, and Kent State is probably one of the 5 worst teams in the country right now. So, we're not, even if they score 70 points, we're still not going to have everything answered about Penn State until they get into a heavier part of their schedule. But, against teams like that, and look, I'm from Ohio. The Mid-American Conference plays a great brand of football. Yep. I'm a big fan of the MAC, but at home in Beaver Stadium, 100 and some thousand people, you should be able to put those teams away easier than the problems they had with Bowling Green.
Love me some action, baby. Love me some action. Come on. I'm also glad to hear that it was a nice, close battle of the Blackledges. That always helps things in the Blackledge household.
Yeah.